Hey Hugonauts, so I heard that you are all reading The Mountain and the Sea and had some questions. So I thought I'd put together this little video and give you a few answers to the questions that you had. And I want to say right at the outset that I'm not like a videographer or anything like that, so this is not going to be perfect. And I'm just going to treat it like it's uh, the same kind of interaction you'd be having with me, maybe in a conversation. So let's jump right in. Number one was, it seems like you really went to Con Dao. If so, what was it like? Is there really a legend of a sea monster there? I did actually really go to Con Dao, and in fact, I worked on the island with youth on a program that the US consulate had sponsored. And that was a program to help the kids learn how to photograph animals, specifically insects and small animals, and then they would upload the photographs. These were high school students. They would upload the photographs to a website where the species would be identified by US scientists. It was a very successful program. We also had a couple of other environmental programs there. I was at the time the Environment, Science, Technology, and Health Officer for the US consulate in Ho Chi Minh City. And so I got to spend weeks on the archipelago, and I got to dive its reefs. I dove there at night, did a lot of exploring on motorbike and on foot of the jungles, etc. So yes, it was a very real place, and I think I knew I always knew I would set something there, but I didn't really know what. And then when I got the sort of story about the octopus, then it came together for me that that would be the setting for this kind of book. And no, the other part of the question is there a legend about a sea monster? And no, there is not. Although there are a lot of ghosts on the island. The locals believe very strongly in ghosts, and there is a very famous prison there where initially dissidents that were fighting against French colonial rule, and then later people fighting against the South Vietnamese American-sponsored government were held, tortured, some of them killed. And so the island does have this long sort of history of haunting, but not specifically a sea monster. So question number two is, I've heard of terrible conditions on deep sea fishing boats in the real world, but the book opened up the possibility of full-blown slavery to me. Is that happening in the real world today? Yes, that is happening in the real world today. There are probably tens of thousands of slaves on fishing boats globally. And if you want to learn more about this, you can watch the documentary Ghost Fleet. That's a good source. But there are lots of good sources for slavery in the fishing industry. And this is a real problem. Basically, what I say to people is that as far as the sea wolf section of The Mountain and the Sea goes, the only thing that is really science fiction is the AI boat captain, and everything else is basically happening right now. So, question number three, Ha's quote about empathy sums up the communication barriers in every interaction in the book. To what extent does empathy require faith, in the sense of trust without full proof? And how pessimistic / optimistic are you about finding empathy in real life situations? Well, so here is what I fundamentally believe about empathy. I think that empathy is the core of all communication. And I think that all communication which occurs at any level in the world involves some kind of empathy for the other person. And I'm talking about any successful act of communication, right? So the unsuccessful acts of communication are quite often unsuccessful because there is no empathy. And therefore, I believe, since successful communication happens all the time, that in fact, empathy exists and is kind of everywhere. So I am a bit of an optimist about empathy. But at the same time, there's a lot of miscommunication and there's a lot of lack of empathy in the world, and that's clear to me as well. So a bit of a dual answer. I'm not optimistic or pessimistic particularly about this point. I just think that in order to really listen to another person or to an animal or to anything, you need to be able to in some way put yourself in their place. So Number 4 is, did you consider writing longer novellas or novels for each of the 3 sub-stories in the book? Eiko in particular had several fans who wanted more. Good question. The answer is no. Although one of the editors that my agent pitched The Mountain and the Sea to did actually suggest that maybe we should take the Eiko section and make it a separate novella. But I felt that was actually a sign that particular editor wasn't understanding the importance of that narrative element in the book, and therefore didn't really understand where The Mountain and the Sea was coming from. So, question number 5. What is the mountain of the title? So, I do get this question an awful lot. So, it's an interesting story. I wrote a poem about Con Dao called, I think it's called Night Gleaning Con Dao. And it is about these fishermen who would come down to the shore at night to do a little bit of basically spear fishing for crab and that kind of thing along the shoreline. And in that poem, I referred to the island, to all islands, as mountains in the sea. There's a line in that poem that says, an island is a mountain in the sea. But the interesting thing is that line was actually cut out of that poem later. I didn't remember that it was cut until I went back and tried to find the reference, my own reference to the title of The Mountain and the Sea, and wasn't able to. But yeah, that's where the title comes from. And it is, for me, what it represents the most is this idea that we see things from very different perspectives. And for some people, an island is an island, and for other people, an island is just the peak of a mountain. From other people, I mean people of other species, right? Capable of thinking or seeing that island in a very different way. So, I loved the excerpts of Ha's and Minerva Daughter Chan's books in the chapter headers. Agree with fellow book club member, I think it's Malta Santana or Maita Santana. I just can't read my screen properly because the font is a little small. That they'd be a fascinating read. How much of these books didn't make it into the novel? So there isn't that much material from those 2 books that didn't make it into the novel. And the reason is that what those sort of sections actually are is they are these reworkings of parts of philosophy books that I was reading, books about consciousness, etc., that I wanted to see if I understood correctly by explaining myself, if that makes sense. And then also reword in a way that I thought was more readable. I've always said that, like, one of the themes of The Mountain and the Sea is I read these books so that you don't have to. And what I sort of mean by that is just that, as you know, some of these theory and philosophy books can be really dense and maybe feel very jargon heavy. And I wanted to reword and kind of rework some ideas and make them more accessible to the lay reader, basically, to people who just weren't versed in this kind of jargon. And it's not about dumbing down the content. In fact, my goal was to not dumb down any content, but just to remove the jargon from the concepts and then use those as the epigraphs. But yeah, there isn't that much material from those 2 sort of pseudo books that really exists, because most of it, when I look back, someone else asked me this question before, and I looked back at what I had in my notes for The Mountain and the Sea, and I think 95% of it ended up in the pages of the final book. Okay, so number 7 is, I'm interested in, why didn't you give the 50-year-old man who ends up in a body cast in Istanbul a name? Yeah, so I really wanted him to sort of play this role of being a little bit of an unknown, right, for Rustem. He almost plays like the role of Rustem's conscience, his conscience awakening. And I wanted to give a sense that he was in a way almost, and not that he's not a real person, but almost not there, almost like a foil for Rustem's own internal thinking about things. And not giving him a name is one way that I would use sometimes to distance people a little bit from certain characters. Like, naming is a powerful thing. Not naming someone is a choice that you make when you want someone to seem a little bit inhuman or a little bit outside of the rest of the context of the book. And that was my goal with that character. All right, so number 8 is, since finishing the book, what has been the idea that stayed with you the most persistently and continued to transform your thinking? Same question asked another way. Are there any ideas presented in the book that have transformed since you wrote it and that you might write about differently now? Well, okay, so you gave me a little bit of a segue to talk about the tusks of extinction. So there were some ideas about consciousness and the embodiment of consciousness that I didn't go into as much as I might have liked to in The Mountain in the Sea, and that I go into a lot more in The Tusks of Extinction, which is a novella that will be coming out on the 16th of January 2024. I think there's a lot more there when I think about especially things like how our perception of reality affects the way we think about the embodiments of meaning and lots of other things. But the big one would really be, tackling the idea of memory, consciousness, and how the mind works. And that's something that I just continue to ponder. And so I think I'm far from done writing about these themes. I'm also far from done writing about animal minds and things like that. Although my next novel, after The Tusks of Extinction, is not focused on the animal world, but is much more focused on human politics. So yeah, those are the 8 questions that I had from you. And I hope this was helpful in answering some of those. I look forward to hearing how the discussion went, and I'm really grateful to all of you for spending this time with my book, and really grateful to the Hugonauts for everything that you're doing for science fiction. Thanks so much. And I hope that you will also, get a chance to read The Tusks of Extinction. And I hope you'll reach out to me if you have any further questions. I'm always open to being contacted via my website and Twitter and any other way you can find to bug me. All right. Have a great one. Bye.